In 2002, 6-year-old Hailey Collins vanished from her bed during a stormy night in Washington. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses, just a missing child and a family torn apart. 9 years later, her mother finds an old toy recorder in a dusty attic. Inside a whisper, what follows uncovers a twisted truth buried in the most familiar places. The spring of 2002 arrived early in the sleepy suburb of Mill Ridge, a modest neighborhood nestled on the edges of Spokane, Washington. The houses here, spaced generously apart, were framed by towering evergreens and gravel driveways, the kind of place where everyone knew your dog's name, but maybe not your own. On the night of May 3rd, a heavy rain lashed against the Collins' beige, 2-story home. Lightning danced across the sky in soft flickers, illuminating the slanted roof and the modest porch swing that creaked slightly in the wind. Inside, the warmth of domestic normalcy enveloped the family of 3. Jessica Collins had just finished folding laundry in the living room, her hands smelling faintly of lavender detergent. Upstairs, her husband Mark was brushing his teeth, the sound of the electric toothbrush muffled through the hallway. Their 7-year-old daughter, Hailey, had fallen asleep clutching her stuffed koala, nestled beneath a faded quilt patterned with stars and planets. Jessica checked on her once before heading to bed, adjusting the fan in the corner of the room to circulate the unusually warm spring air. Hailey's tiny chest rose and fell in rhythmic peace, her dark brown curls splayed across the pillow. Jessica didn't notice that the window beside the bed was open a few inches, left so intentionally as Hailey had insisted it help her sleep. By 2:43 a.m., the house was silent except for the steady hum of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Then, at 6:11 a.m., Jessica awoke with a jolt. She couldn't place what startled her at first, maybe a dream, or maybe that strange maternal instinct that flicks on like a switch in the spine. She tiptoed to Hailey's room. The bed was empty. At first, Jessica assumed Hailey had slipped into their room after a nightmare, something she did occasionally, curling up quietly at the foot of the bed. But she wasn't there, nor in the guest room, nor in the upstairs bathroom. Panic rose slowly, like a tide. She opened every door, checked every closet. When she reached the backyard sliding door and found it locked, yet the window in Hailey's room still open, her breath hitched. Arch, now wide awake and shirtless in pajama pants, was already outside by then, barefoot on the wet grass, shouting her name. "Hailey, baby, it's Daddy, come out!" But there was only the hiss of rain and the creak of the fence gate. Jessica called 911 at 6:24 a.m. The dispatcher kept her on the line until 2 cruisers and a K-9 unit arrived 15 minutes later. The neighborhood, usually sleepy and slow to stir, was buzzing by sunrise. Flashing lights, officers canvassing yards, dogs sniffing the earth. What haunted everyone most was what they didn't find. No signs of forced entry, no broken lock, no scream heard. But then one officer called over from the back corner of the yard. "We've got tracks, tiny bare footprints, no more than 6 inches long, led away from the window." They appeared in soft, muddy impressions behind the house and stopped abruptly near the back fence, not at the street, not near the alley, just stopped. Jessica collapsed into Mark's arms, unable to process what she was hearing. "She's barefoot," she whispered. "Why would she be barefoot?" She hadn't even gone outside to play the day before. How did those prints make sense? The media came quickly, first local, then regional, southwestern, and shy brown eyes. Volunteers showed up in droves. Forest areas, abandoned sheds, old wells, all searched. Nothing. Days passed, then weeks. Mark barely slept. Jessica didn't at all. The police interviewed neighbors, checked registered offenders in the county, even pulled surveillance footage from a gas station 2 miles away. But there was nothing to go on. No ransom note, no shadow caught in a lens. Hailey had simply vanished, and in Mill Ridge, people stopped leaving windows open, even in the warmest nights. In the days that followed Hailey's disappearance, the investigation intensified, but not in the direction Jessica expected. While she stayed glued to the phone, fielding calls from friends, volunteers, and reporters, Detective Lucas Brenner, an aging investigator with tired eyes and a reputation for digging deep, began focusing not outward, but inward. His instincts, honed over 2 decades in missing persons, had taught him that strangers rarely snatch children from beds in the dead of night without leaving a trace. The absence of struggle, the silence, the open window without damage. It all seemed too neat. And then there was Mark. Mark Collins was a devoted father. He coached Hailey's Little League softball team, picked her up from school every Friday, and baked banana bread on weekends. But beneath that suburban exterior lay cracks. 2 years earlier, Mark had lost his job at a packaging firm after the company relocated operations to Nevada. The layoff hit him hard. For months he withdrew, sleeping in late, drinking more than usual, missing Hailey's school events. Jessica had confided in her sister during that time, once saying, "I feel like I'm parenting 2 kids right now." Mark eventually stabilized, took freelance work in carpentry, and things had appeared to normalize. But now, with Hailey gone, the grief in his eyes seemed tinged with something else, something Brenner couldn't quite define. On the 4th day of the investigation, Brenner asked Mark to come in for a formal interview at the precinct. Jessica insisted on accompanying him, but Mark waved her off. "It's fine," he told her. "They just have to check every box." The interview, conducted in a sterile room with flickering fluorescent lights, lasted nearly 3 hours. Brenner was methodical, starting gently, asking about the day before Hailey disappeared, the night routine, her mood. Mark answered every question directly, though his hands rarely stopped fidgeting. Then the tone shifted. Brenner brought up the job loss. "Must have been hard," he said. "Going from full-time provider to home most days?" Mark nodded. "Yeah, it sucked, but I dealt with it. Got help," Brenner pressed on. Jessica mentioned in passing that things got tense. "You ever lose your temper with Hailey?" Mark's jaw clenched. "Never, not once." The detective leaned back, scribbling notes. "We're not accusing you, Mark, just trying to rule things out. You know how these things go." Later that afternoon, a junior officer named Carla Ruiz was reviewing traffic camera footage from 3 intersections near the Collins neighborhood. It was tedious work, scanning hours of grainy, time-stamped black and white footage, but at 2:58 a.m. on the night of May 3rd, she froze the frame. A silver pickup truck, no visible plates, appeared heading south on Alder Creek Road, just 3 blocks from the Collins' home. The timestamp placed it roughly 40 minutes before Jessica woke to find Hailey missing. Ruiz flagged it and sent a still image to Brenner, who studied it in silence. Silver pickups weren't uncommon, but this one had a cracked left tail light and a faded bumper sticker on the back. Jessica, when shown the image, said it looked vaguely familiar, though she couldn't say why. Mark, when asked, claimed he didn't recognize it at all. "Not from the neighborhood," he said flatly. Brenner, intrigued, redirected some of his focus. He requested access to neighborhood surveillance, Ring doorbells, old security cams, and matched the truck's route. It seemed to circle the block twice between 2:45 and 3:05 a.m., then disappear southbound toward Highway 195. No license plate, no visible driver. It was something, finally. Meanwhile, the pressure on Mark didn't dissipate. Word had leaked, perhaps from within the department, that he was being looked at. A local blog ran a speculative piece titled, "Inside the Home, Could the Father Be Hiding Something?" And even though police hadn't named him, the insinuation spread like wildfire. Neighbors grew cold. At the grocery store, a woman refused to bag his items. Jessica, furious, confronted Brenner. "You're destroying him?" she snapped. "And for what? He was here. He was with me. He'd never hurt." Brenner didn't argue. He simply pointed to the data. "People lie, Jessica. Emotions lie. Timelines lie. But cameras don't." The silver truck became the new focus, and for the first time in a week, hope flickered again, because if the truck belonged to someone outside the home, it meant the story wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. That night, Jessica found Mark in the garage, sitting on the cool concrete floor, staring at a pile of wood scraps he'd meant to build a birdhouse with for Hailey's science project. His eyes were hollow. "They think I did it," he said quietly. "They think I took my own daughter." She crouched beside him, unsure how to respond. Somewhere deep inside, a sliver of doubt had begun to take root. Not because she truly suspected him, but because the silence of that night had been so absolute, so eerie, that maybe anything was possible. And yet, even in that moment, something nagged at her. Something about that truck. The bumper sticker. Where had she seen it before? The image hovered in her mind, elusive, like a half-remembered name on the tip of the tongue, and as she lay in bed hours later, sleepless once again, her mind circled the same question Brenner had written in his notepad. Who drives the silver pickup? By the time May of 2004 arrived, 2 full years had passed since Hailey Collins vanished from her bedroom, and the silence that had followed her disappearance grew heavier with each passing month. Despite the initial burst of attention, media coverage, community searches, psychics, rewards, everything had slowed to a crawl. Leads went nowhere, tips dried up, and the silver pickup truck that once seemed like a breakthrough remained unidentified. Detective Brenner, now assigned to another case, admitted quietly to Jessica that they had nothing left. "We've turned over every stone," he said, his voice flat with resignation. "Without new evidence, we're shelving it." Jessica sat in that small office, clutching the same photograph of Hailey she'd carried since day one. Her knuckles white. She didn't argue. She didn't scream. She just nodded, numb. The case was classified as inactive, cold. The community, once gripped by fear and sympathy, gradually returned to normal. The flyer boards at the grocery store were replaced with garage sale announcements and lost dog notices. News crews stopped showing up. People stopped whispering. And eventually, Jessica and Mark stopped talking. At first, they tried to hold things together for the sake of routine. Shared dinners, therapy sessions, church on Sundays, but there were too many silences. Too many nights where Mark sat alone in the garage, too many mornings Jessica woke from dreams of Hailey only to find the house still empty. They began sleeping in separate rooms. Counseling turned into shouting. By November 2004, Jessica filed for divorce. "Lost her," she told the mediator, "and now we've lost us." The process was quick, mutual, quietly painful. Jessica took what little she could carry and left Millridge behind. She moved to Boise, Idaho, into a modest apartment with beige carpets and thin walls, far from the memories etched into every corner of their old house. She found work as a part-time receptionist at a dental clinic, changed her last name back to Morgan, and told people she didn't have children. It wasn't that she denied Hailey's existence. It was that she didn't know how to explain a daughter whose story had no ending. Back in Millridge, Mark stayed in the house. He kept Hailey's room exactly as it was, down to the rumpled bedspread and the sticker chart on the closet door. He rarely spoke to anyone except the mailman. People in the neighborhood stopped checking in. It was as if the Collins family had quietly disappeared along with their daughter. And then there was Rick Turner. Rick had lived 2 houses down from the Collins family, an unmarried man in his early 40s who worked night shifts as a delivery driver for an industrial parts company. He had thinning hair, always wore a Seahawks cap, and was known for keeping to himself. Jessica remembered him as polite but distant, occasionally waving from his porch or offering a nod as he mowed his lawn. After Hailey vanished, Rick had been interviewed twice by police. The first time, he'd said he was asleep during the incident. The second, he mentioned hearing something like a dog yelp around 3 a.m., but didn't think it was important. The statements were logged, but no red flags were raised. Rick had no record, no history of complaints, no connections to the Collins family beyond proximity. Then, in July 2002, just 2 months after Hailey's disappearances, Rick packed up and moved. There was no garage sale, no notice. One day the house had curtains in the windows, and the next it was empty. A neighbor named Susan, who lived directly across the street, recalled watching him load a small U-Haul with only a mattress, a few crates, and a television. "He didn't even say goodbye," she told Jessica much later. "He was just gone. At the time, no one thought much of it. People were still consumed with Hailey's case. But neighbor moving didn't seem unusual, especially one without ties. But in hindsight, it began to gnaw at Jessica. Why leave so suddenly? Why then, especially after offering so little during questioning? Years later, she would revisit that thought often. Rick's departure lingered in her memory like an unfinished sentence. A small, nagging splinter in a sea of chaos. She had tried to mention it to Brenner during the second year of the investigation, but by then his attachment to Germanet, to Brenner during the second year of the investigation, but by then his attachment to Brenner during the second year of the investigation, but by then his attachment to Nuon. "He's followed up," he said dismissively. "Nothing there." But Jessica couldn't let it go. After her move to Boise, she found herself checking public records late at night, entering Rick Turner into search bars. At first, there was nothing. Then a voter registry appeared, matching date of birth, last seen in Spokane County. By 2005, he no longer appeared in any Washington records. He had vanished in a way that mirrored her daughter, quietly, completely, with no trail. She printed out the page anyway and folded it into a manila folder labeled RT. It was the only file she kept, besides the police reports, the flyers, and the photos. A file that remained untouched in the back of her desk drawer for years, dormant but never discarded. Back in Millridge, Rick's house was rented out, then sold. New families moved in. The neighborhood evolved, softened, but in the minds of those who remembered, there were whispering, faint, unfinished thoughts that never quite surfaced. What had Rick Turner really heard that night? And why had he run? And why did no one else seem to ask? It was the spring of 2011 when Jessica Morgan, now 38 and quieter than she'd ever been, returned to Millridge for the first time in nearly 7 years. The small house on the corner of Oakview and Larch still stood, a little more worn now, the paint peeling at the trim, weeds creeping along the walkway. The real estate agent had warned her it needed work before listing, but Jessica didn't come to fix. She came to empty it. The memories inside were more tangled than any overgrown lawn. She walked through the front door slowly, the scent of aged wood and old carpet immediately flooding her senses. The house was still hers on paper, but it hadn't felt like home in years. The air inside was stale, the silence thicker than she remembered. Most rooms were emptied except for dust and a few forgotten boxes shoved into corners. The kitchen cabinets still held expired canned goods. The living room ceiling had a water stain shaped like a question mark. She saved the garage for last. The garage door groaned as it opened, revealing the same cluttered chaos she had left behind, a time capsule of a life that stopped too soon. Stacks of Rubbermaid bins, an old rocking horse, a broken lamp. In the far corner, a box labeled Hay's Room sat crooked on top of a plastic sled. Jessica hesitated. Her hands trembled as she knelt beside it, fingers brushing over the handy rank that had once been her own. Inside were the remnants of Hailey's 7 short years. A drawing pad with half-sketched animals, a pink hairbrush with tiny strands still tangled in the bristles, and a small, scuffed Fisher-Play voice recorder with flower stickers peeling at the corners. Jessica let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She sat cross-legged on the cold concrete and held the recorder in both hands. It was a cheap plastic toy from a chain store with one red button to record and another green one to play. She pressed the green button, expecting static, maybe silence. For a few seconds, that's all she got. Then came Hailey's voice, and I'm smart, and this is my recorder. Jessica smiled, tears welling despite herself. The recording continued with Hailey laughing, talking to her stuffed koala, and singing part of the alphabet off-key. The voice felt like sunlight in a storm, beautiful and brutal all at once. She hit play again, replaying it, just to hear her daughter's voice echo in the garage. She almost turned it off. Almost. But then, just as she reached to press stop, another segment clicked in, a new recording hidden deeper in the toy's memory. The tone was different, softer. Hailey's voice was lower, barely above a whisper. "Mommy," she said, and Jessica's breath caught. "Mommy, I can't sleep. There's someone outside the window." A pause, then more words, quieter. "He's back? The man with the hat. I think it's Mr. Rick. He's looking in again." Jessica froze. The name, Rick, landed like a brick in her chest. The garage seemed to collapse in around her, the air sucked out. She replayed the last part, leaning in. The whisper was so fragile it could have been missed entirely. "I think it's Mr. Rick." Jessica's fingers trembled as she replayed the phrase, again and again, the words burning deeper with each loop. She remembered how the police never followed up, how his name had stayed etched in her mind all these years. A dozen thoughts collided at once. Why hadn't she checked the recorder before? How had this stayed buried for so long? Why had Hailey been scared? And more importantly, why hadn't anyone believed her? Still sitting on the garage floor, Jessica grabbed her phone and recorded the playback. Her hands moved on autopilot. She didn't know what she'd do with it yet, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was a piece of the puzzle. Maybe not the whole picture, but something real, something provable. She stood, legs weak, and stumbled into the house with the recorder still playing in her palm. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water, but her eyes never left the toy. "He's back," the voice said again, soft as a ghost. "I think it's Mr. Rick." The next morning, Jessica called the Spokane County Sheriff's Office. She asked for Detective Brenner. The voice on the other end told her he'd retired 2 years ago. She asked for whoever was handling cold cases now. Within 2 days, she was sitting across from Detective Amanda Reyes in a small office downtown, the recorder placed between them. Amanda listened without interruption, her brow furrowing as the whispers played. "You're certain this man was your neighbor?" she asked. Jessica nodded. "Rick Turner. He lived 2 doors down. He moved out just 2 months after she disappeared." Amanda wrote the name down slowly. "Do you have an address?" Jessica shook her head. "No, but I've been trying to find him for years." Amanda leaned back, eyes fixed on the recorder. "We're going to reopen this." For the first time in nearly a decade, Jessica felt something stir, something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Not hope, not yet, but motion. And in the silence that followed, Harold's voice played once more, whispering from the edge of the past. The Cold Case Division wasted no time. Within 48 hours of Jessica turning over the voice recording, Detective Amanda Reyes submitted a formal request to reopen the Collins case. It was the whisper, the quiet, eerie mention of Mr. Rick, that pushed the matter beyond speculation. Reyes, methodical and unshakably calm, began combing through every old report, every interview transcript, every overlooked angle. Rick Turner, whose name had faded from official attention almost a decade ago, suddenly stood front and center again. What they found immediately raised red flags. Turner had no digital footprint after 2002, not under that name. No recent addresses, no tax records, no employment history, but after digging through DMV data and cross-referencing out-of-state aliases, Reyes struck gold. A man matching Turner's photo had obtained a commercial driver's license in Twin Falls, Idaho in 2006, this time under the name Eric Thomas Rand. The photo was nearly identical. Same sloping nose, same receding hairline, same faint scar above the left brow. Fingerprints were not required for that class of license back then, so he had slipped through undetected for years. Reyes contacted Idaho state authorities quietly. Within days, she received confirmation Eric Rand had worked as a maintenance technician at a small private medical clinic in Jerome, Idaho, for over 5 years. He lived in a modest single-wire trailer just outside town, paid in cash, and largely kept to himself. There were no criminal charges on file, but in 2008, a local woman had filed appropriate comments and unsolicited visits to her teenage daughter by a man fitting his description. The case was closed due to lack of evidence. Still, the pattern was there, quiet, slippery, just beneath the threshold of arrestable offense. When Reyes brought this information to Jessica, the mother sat still for a long time, staring at the man's new name printed on the report. "He changed who he was," she whispered, "because he knew he couldn't stay who he was." Armed with a search warrant and with assistance from Idaho law enforcement, Reyes coordinated a quiet entry into the clinic where Rick, now Eric, still worked. It was late afternoon on a Thursday when the team entered. The clinic was in session, patients in waiting rooms, nurses at computers. Reyes presented the warrant to the clinic director and requested immediate access to employee storage and the building's maintenance area. Turner wasn't working that day, which made the process cleaner. In the basement storage room, among dusty shelving units and scattered tools, officers opened a locked filing cabinet labeled General Records, Archived. Inside were random administrative documents, forms, inventory lists, outdated logs. But near the back, Reyes found something that froze her blood. A manila folder labeled Collins, Hailey. She opened it with gloved hands. Inside were several photocopies, Hailey's immunization records, an old-school nurse report noting a peanut allergy, and a standard pediatric checkup sheet dated February 2002, just 3 months before the disappearance. None of the documents had original stamps from the Idaho clinic. In fact, they were clearly reproductions, likely photocopied from a school file or prior medical folder. The address listed on them was the Mill Ridge residence. There was no legitimate reason for these papers to be here. Reyes looked around the dim room, the hum of old light bulbs buzzing above her. This wasn't just suspicious, it was chilling. Somehow, Turner had kept these records. Either he had accessed them years ago or had obtained them through unknown means. But the fact that he brought them with him, stored them at his place of work, and kept them for years without detection suggested something deeper than obsession. It suggested ownership. When confronted, the clinic staff confirmed that Eric had kept that cabinet locked and personal. No one else had a key. "He always said it was just boring supply stuff," one of the nurses said. "We didn't question it, but when Reyes showed them Hailey's name, several of them recognized it." "Wait," another nurse said slowly. "That name? It's familiar. He used to talk about a niece named Hailey. Said she lived in Oregon with her aunt. He showed me a drawing once. Said she'd mailed it to him." Reyes made a note. The image of Turner inventing a niece, sharing a fake narrative, weaving a lie so casual it sounded benign, that struck her harder than 100 red flags. People like him didn't just act, they rewrote entire worlds. With the file in evidence and the clinic thoroughly photographed, Reyes moved quickly to locate Turner. His trailer, a short drive from the clinic, was empty when officers arrived. The windows were shut tight. The door was locked. Inside, there were no visible signs of struggle, but the place was meticulously neat, too neat. The refrigerator was full, laundry folded, calendar marked with regular appointments. It didn't look like a man on the run. It looked like a man planning to return. But Reyes wasn't convinced he would. Jessica, informed of every development in real time, could barely process the scope of it all. The idea that Turner had not only taken Hailey, but rebuilt his life, invented new stories, embedded himself into another community, it sickened her. And the medical records, why those? Why carry something so specific, so traceable, unless he needed them? Unless he was showing them to someone? Reyes, pacing her office that night, mulled over the same question. What if Hailey wasn't just a memory to Turner? What if she was still alive? Jessica didn't wait for permission. The moment Detective Reyes confirmed that Rick Turner, now Eric Rand, was no longer at his trailer and likely aware of the investigation, something in Jessica snapped into action. For years she had floated in paralysis, trapped between grief and guesswork, but now she had momentum, and she wasn't going to sit idly while the man who might have stolen her daughter disappeared again. She packed a duffel bag, left a note for her supervisor at the clinic, and drove the 10 hours from Boise to Jerome in one stretch, her hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel the entire way. The landscape blurred past, highways, wheat fields, empty gas stations, but her mind stayed locked on a single image, the manila folder in the clinic basement, and the whisper on that tape. She arrived just after sunrise and drove straight to the clinic parking lot. Her plan was crude, instinctive, and possibly dangerous, but she didn't care. She would find him. For 3 days she waited in a borrowed rental parked across the street, camera in her lap, coffee by her side. She watched employees come and go, noted every maintenance worker, every delivery, every unfamiliar face. And on the 4th day he appeared. The man stepped out of a dusty red sedan, thinner than she remembered, hair grayer, or whoever he really was. Her heart pounded as she snapped the first photo. She watched as he walked into the clinic, nodded casually to the receptionist, and disappeared inside like he belonged. He was still working, still pretending, and then, 2 hours later, he re-emerged. With a child, Eska nearly dropped the camera. The girl looked about 10 years old. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a messy braid, and she wore a purple backpack too large for her small frame. Her walk was familiar, her profile even more so. Jessica's breath caught as the girl turned slightly, just enough for her to see the curve of her jaw, the slope of her nose. She raised the camera with shaking hands and clicked the shutter. Once, twice, 3 times. Rick opened the car door for the girl, his hand lightly on her shoulder, and she climbed in without hesitation. They drove off. Jessica didn't move for minutes. 2 photos were blurred, but usable. She zoomed in, studying the girl's features. The resemblance was overwhelming, but memory was a dangerous thing, especially when sharpened by hope. Still, she felt it in her bones. That was Hailey. Not maybe, not could be, was. She sent the images to Reyes immediately, along with the location, timestamps, and plate number. The detective didn't respond for hours, but when she finally did, her message was brief. "I'm escalating this. Stay there. Do not approach." By the next morning, 2 plain-clothed agents from the FBI arrived in Jerome. Jessica met them at a local diner where they asked detailed questions about what she'd seen. They were cautious, methodical, and made no promises. "If this is who you think it is," one of them said, "we have to be absolutely certain. If we move too soon, he vanishes again. We may never get her back." Jessica nodded, understanding even though her nerves screamed for action. She watched from a distance as the agents coordinated surveillance. They tracked Rick's movements, observed the clinic, and watched the red sedan. After 4 days, they confirmed the child's routine: school, clinic, home, never alone, never out of sight. It was simple and quiet. The agents worked with a local school nurse who arranged a routine dental screening under the pretense of a community health initiative. The girl, registered under the name Emily Rand, was cooperative. A simple cheek swab was all it took. The sample was delivered to a lab under strict confidentiality. Jessica was not told when the results would come in. She waited in a motel room just outside town, pacing endlessly, jumping at every knock. On the 6th day, Reyes called. "It's her." Jessica sank to the floor. There was no margin of error in the match. The DNA was a perfect 99.99% maternal link to Jessica Morgan. Hailey, alive, 10 years old, living under another name in another town with another life. The agents prepared the extraction plan immediately. The goal was to retrieve the child with minimal trauma, avoid public exposure, and remove Rick without confrontation. But there was one unforeseen factor. Hailey didn't know. She believed her name was Emily. She believed Rick was her father. She attended school, got good grades, played piano. According to neighbors and school staff, she was quiet but sweet, loved to read, ored animals, never caused trouble. There were no signs of abuse, no outward evidence of fear. She smiled in photos, wrote her name in careful cursive, and drew birthday cards for a man who had stolen her past. Jessica didn't know how to feel. Relief warred with dread, joy tangled with terror. How do you reclaim a daughter who doesn't remember you? How do you tell a child that the only life she knows is a lie? The FBI prepared Jessica for the possibility that Hailey might not accept her, might resist, might even believe Rick's version of the world. Jessica didn't care. "I just want her safe," she whispered, "even if she hates me at first." Once Hailey, now known to the world as Emily Rand, was taken into protective custody and removed from Rick's home, the FBI allowed Jessica a brief supervised visit at a neutral center in Boise. It didn't go as she imagined. Hailey had looked at her with polite detachment, as if staring at a stranger claiming something absurd. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. When Jessica tried to show her the old koala plush and mentioned the name, Hailey, the girl simply whispered, "That's not me." Jessica left that room hollowed out. The DNA confirmed it, the law confirmed it. But the child in front of her had been rewired, and that terrifying transformation sent agents deeper into Rick Turner's past. What they uncovered twisted everything Jessica thought she knew. It began with a records request from Reyes, who asked for access to sealed civil court filings in Spokane County under Turner's original name. It turned out Rick had once been a familiar presence in Jessica's family long before Hailey ever existed. Back in 1995, when Jessica was still in high school, where her father, Gerald Morgan, taught auto mechanics. According to school records, Turner had multiple infractions for inappropriate behavior, lingering around the teacher's lounge, overstepping boundaries with students, making off-comments comments. But the most alarming detail came from an old HR memo. Gerald Morgan filed a formal complaint against Turner after he showed up at the Morgans' home one weekend, uninvited, holding flowers. Jessica's mother had answered the door. Turner claimed he just wanted to apologize in person. The apology turned aggressive. Gerald physically removed him from the property. Later that year, the family filed a civil restraining order citing harassment and repeated stalking behavior. Turner vanished from school employment shortly after. Jessica had forgotten all of it, or rather, she had buried it. She'd been too young then to understand the full threat, and her parents had tried to shield her from it. But now it became obvious that Rick Turner hadn't randomly chosen Hailey. He had known exactly who she was. She was Gerald Morgan's granddaughter. He had watched the family grow, quietly, obsessively, in the background for years, until one night in 2002 when he took what he believed was his to rest. Jessica sat across from Reyes in disbelief, but the detective laid out the file. "He waited," Reyes said quietly. "He changed names, changed locations, but he never let you go. You were the original target. Hailey was how he rewrote the story." The horror of it seeped in slowly. For nearly 2 decades, a man she'd barely remembered had held her child under a delusion built on vengeance and fantasy. The psychological reports were worse. After initial medical checks, Hailey, Emily, was placed under observation with trauma counselors and child psychologists. What she said shocked even the most seasoned experts. She truly believed Rick had adopted her after her mother had consistently that her mother had traded her away to avoid responsibility. In Turner's twisted narrative, he had saved her from a family who didn't want her. He fed her half-truths, showing old photos of Jessica as a teenager and saying they were of a cousin who ran away. He fabricated memories, introduced fake letters from social workers, even staged imaginary court stories to justify why she couldn't contact anyone outside. And perhaps most disturbingly, he had convinced her that the outside world was full of people who would hurt her if she ever spoke the truth. "Would I want to leave?" Hailey asked during one session. "Rick gave me everything. He always said if I ever got taken, bad people would lie to me." Her tone was confused, not angry, like someone pulled from a dream mid-sentence. Jessica read the transcript and wept. The damage ran deep. Turner hadn't just kidnapped her daughter, he'd dismantled her identity. He'd rebuilt her into a version that fit his fantasy. Obedient, dependent, grateful. The kind of child who would never question the story she'd been fed. Investigators found drawings from when she was 8, depicting her and Rick in a small house labeled Home Forever. No mother, no extended family, just them. In his trailer, agents discovered years' worth of fabricated documents, fake school projects signed with Rand, invented report cards, even a birthday card Jessica had once written to Hailey, heavily altered to look like a generic message from an old babysitter. He had erased Jessica, line by line, over years. Jessica kept returning to one phrase Hailey had used: "He gave me everything." It broke her. She thought of all the birthdays she spent alone, lighting a candle for a cake no one would eat. She thought of the tiny bed with the koala bear that hadn't been slept in since 2002. She thought of the fear Hailey must have felt in those early days, the confusion, the desperation, and how Rick had slowly flooded that void with a dangerous version of love. And now, reclaiming her wouldn't just be about bringing her home. It would be about undoing an entire life of falsehoods. Still, even in that heartbreak, Jessica began to understand something deeper. Rick hadn't taken Hailey on impulse. He had waited years for the right moment. He had monitored their lives from a distance. He had chosen her not because she was vulnerable, but because she was his narrative. The daughter of the family who'd rejected him. The granddaughter of the man who'd forced him out. This wasn't a kidnapping. It was revenge dressed up as rescue. Once the DNA confirmation was presented alongside the psychological manipulation uncovered through interviews and document evidence, federal court proceedings moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, the United States District Court for the District of Idaho granted Jessica Morgan temporary guardianship over Hailey Collins, pending a full custody hearing. It was a procedural victory, a recognition of Jessica's rights as a biological parent and the criminal nature of Rick Turner's deception. Yet nothing about the moment felt victorious. When the judge delivered the ruling, Jessica's hands remained still in her lap, her breath shallow. The gavel struck the bench, but Hailey, still called Emily in her mind, sat 3 chairs away, silent, her eyes avoiding everyone in the room. Despite the court's decision, the real challenge lay ahead. Legally, Jessica was now Hailey's guardian, but emotionally, Hailey remained tethered to the only life she'd ever known. When the social worker explained that she'd be going to stay with Jessica in Boise, even temporarily, Hailey didn't cry. She didn't scream, she simply whispered, "I don't want to go." The tone was not rebellion, it was grief. Rick had embedded himself so deeply in her psyche that separation felt like abandonment. not rescue. Counselors called it trauma bonding, a psychological condition in which victims form deep emotional attachments to their abusers, especially when isolated for long periods. In the days that followed, Jessica did everything she could to bridge the distance. She repainted the guest room in warm colors, bought Hailey's favorite books based on therapist suggestions, cooked quietly, and tried not to overwhelm. But Hailey remained a stranger in her own skin, politely distant, always watching, never engaging. At meals, she picked at food. At night, she refused to sleep with the door closed. She flinched when Jessica entered rooms too quickly. Each moment was a quiet reminder that 9 years can reshape reality beyond recognition. Sessions with child psychologists began 3 times a week. At first, Hailey barely spoke. She drew pictures instead, houses without windows, faceless people, a tall figure holding a balloon with a broken string. But slowly, under the careful guidance of Dr. Lindsay Harper, fragments began to emerge. During one session, Dr. Harper asked Hailey to describe a safe memory. Hailey said, "When Rick brought me soup when I was sick." Asked about something that made her sad, she replied, "When people lie about moms." The therapist asked what she meant. "They say she wanted me back, but why didn't she come get me sooner?" That single question haunted Jessica, but then came the breakthrough. It was late in the 4th week of therapy, during a guided memory exercise using sensory recall, when Hailey suddenly sat upright and said, "It was raining." Hailey's eyes narrowed slightly, her focus drifting somewhere inward. The night we left the house. There was a storm. The window was open. I remember. I had my koala. I was waiting for Mom to come back upstairs. Dr. Harper nodded slowly, saying nothing. Hailey's breathing quickened. Then Rick knocked on the glass. He didn't come inside. He just whispered, "Your mom said, 'I'm here to catch you.'" He said she was waiting in the car. He said she couldn't come in because she was crying. Jessica, watching through the observation glass, felt like her chest collapsed inward. Dr. Harper kept her tone even. "And what did you do then?" Hailey's voice dropped to a whisper. "I opened the window. He helped me climb out." We drove, and kept driving. He told me she changed her mind, that she didn't want me anymore. The room fell still. Jessica broke down in the hallway, unable to breathe. For years she had imagined Hailey being dragged out, screaming, terrible. The reality was somehow worse. Her daughter had been lied to so convincingly, so intimately, that she had stepped willingly into the hands of the man who would erase her. And the detail, "Your mom said I'm here to get you," had never been in any police report, any theory, any article. It was a raw, unrehearsed memory. It was real. The FBI was notified immediately. The tactic Rick had used, impersonating a parental directive, added to the severity of his charges, shifting parts of the case into federal child abduction statutes with psychological fraud enhancements. But more than that, it shattered any illusion that what had happened was survivable by mere time. Hailey had not just been abducted, she had been psychologically dismantled, rebuilt under a false belief that her mother had discarded her. Jessica was advised to proceed with patience. "Trust rebuilds slower than memory," Dr. Harper told her. "You have to give her space to feel before she can believe." Jessica nodded, but her hands were already shaking. The court had given her custody. The therapists had begun to mend the memories. But the daughter she once knew, the girl with the koala and the crooked smile, was still buried deep inside a child who had been taught to forget her. And the voice that whispered from the past, "Your mom said I'm here to get you," still echoed like a curse between every word they tried to rebuild. The courtroom in Boise was packed the day the sentencing hearing for Rick Turner, also known as Eric Rand, finally began. Jessica sat in the front row, flanked by federal agents and trauma counselors, her hands clenched in her lap as the man who had stolen nearly a decade of her daughter's life entered in shackles and a prison HQ Jemison. He looked older, more frail than the figure she remembered from the photos, but his posture was the same, rigid, calculated, almost smug. Hailey was not present. The psychologists agreed it would only re-traumatize her. Instead, Jessica carried a folded drawing Hailey had given her just 3 days prior, a crayon sketch of a treehouse with 2 stick figures underneath it, one labeled me and the other simply Mom. The judge read the charges aloud: child abduction, unlawful imprisonment, endangerment of a minor, identity fraud, obstruction of justice, and psychological coercion under federal enhancement clauses. The sentence was clear and absolute: 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Rick showed no emotion. When asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he stood slowly, adjusted the collar of his jumpsuit, and spoke only one sentence: "I am the only person who ever loved her the right way." The words hung in the room like poison. Jessica felt her body tense as gasps rippled through the crowd. The prosecutor, unfazed, requested that it be entered into the record as the defendant's only statement. The judge obliged. As the gavel came down, the weight of justice landed unevenly. The system had spoken. A monster was behind bars. But the damage, the invisible kind, the kind that bled through time, remained unhealed. Still, Jessica knew it was necessary. The trial had forced the truth into light, piece by agonizing piece, and now the process of true reclamation could begin. But the story didn't end in the courtroom. As part of the investigation's closing procedures, a full forensic team was assigned to catalog and remove all personal effects from Rick's trailer. It was a small, single-wind structure at the edge of town, tucked behind a gas station and a row of scraggly pine trees. From the outside, it looked abandoned, save for the satellite dish on the roof and the rusted mailbox, bearing the name E. Rand. Inside, officers expected to find standard clutter, tools, clothes, maybe falsified documents. What they discovered was far more chilling. In a back closet, inside an unmarked plastic storage bin wrapped in a green towel, they found a leather-bound album and 2 shoeboxes filled with Polaroid photographs, each image cataloged by date, location, and handwritten title. There were over 200 pictures in total, all of Hailey. The earliest ones were dated June 2002, just a month after she disappeared. The image quality was poor, but the subject unmistakable: a small girl in an oversized hoodie, sitting at a picnic table with a cupcake. The caption read, "First real birthday." Others followed. Hailey in Halloween costumes, Hailey asleep on a couch, Hailey holding a fake diploma with a cardboard cap that read, "You graduated." Every image was labeled in Rick's handwriting, with phrases like, "Christmas with your real family," and "Proof of love." It was a visual timeline of an alternate reality he had created, a parallel childhood constructed in isolation and distortion. The image told a story not just of manipulation, but of obsession. One particularly disturbing photo showed Hailey standing near a swing set, holding a sign that read, "Daddy's the best." The back of the photo included a note: "She wrote this unprompted. She knows the truth." Experts later confirmed it was written by Rick himself. Other captions revealed his psychological control. "Tears this morning. Had to remind her who she is," or "She asked about her other mom. Corrected that." Jessica was not allowed to see the full collection immediately. The FBI wanted time to review and redact what they deemed damaging or inappropriate. But one agent, after watching Jessica carefully cradle Hailey's drawing in court, quietly printed 3 images and handed them to her outside. "These won't hurt her to see," the agent said, "but they might help you understand." Jessica took them with trembling hands. The first showed Hailey at age 9, playing with a rescued puppy, her eyes bright, but something hollow beneath the surface. The second was from a fake birthday party, balloons, a cake, but no guests. The third broke her, Hailey asleep, clutching the koala Jessica had thought lost forever. She stared at that image for hours that night, trying to reconcile the girl in the photo with the one now sleeping down the hallway in a room Jessica had filled with books and warmth and cautious hope. This man, this ghost who called himself the only one who ever loved her, had documented his delusion with precision, crafting an archive of lies as if preserving a museum of his crimes, and in every photo, Hailey's smile carried a quiet plea she hadn't known she was sending. The discovery of the photo collection added layers to the prosecution's psychological profile. Experts now described Rick not only as a manipulator, but a constructive fantasist, someone who couldn't merely lie, but had to build an entire reality around his version of truth. He didn't see what he did as theft. He saw it as rescue. Each photo was a relic of a world he believed was better than the one Hailey had been born into. And that belief, twisted, fervent, had fueled every choice he made from the moment he slipped through the night and whispered through a rain-slicked window. 4 years after the sentencing, life in Boise had settled into something resembling normalcy, though normal would always be a fragile word in the Collins household. Hailey was 16 now, but most people knew her as Ray. The name change had been her choice, a quiet reclaiming of identity under the guidance of her therapist. "Hailey is who he called me," she'd said once. "Ray is who I get to choose." The court approved it without objection. Ray Collins enrolled at Northridge School of the Arts as a sophomore, focusing on digital illustration and music composition. Her drawings were expressive, often dark, filled with surreal imagery, doorways inside forests, faceless figures, children with wide, knowing eyes. Her piano compositions were slow, almost haunting, and never performed publicly. Jessica, now working part-time as a medical assistant and full-time as a mother on the mend, never missed a school event. They lived in a 2-bedroom townhouse with ivy creeping up the porch and mismatched flower pots lining the steps. Ray had her own room, her own key, her own space to heal, but the trauma lingered in quieter ways. Some nights, Ray still woke screaming. Not every week, but often enough that Jessica kept tea bags and a heating pad near the kettle, just in case. On those nights, Ray never wanted to talk, but she always wanted to sit beside Jessica on the living room couch, wrapped in silence and blanket. It had taken years for physical closeness to feel safe again. Still, the scars remained. Ray didn't trust locked doors. She hated unannounced knocks. She never rode in the passenger seat, and she never, ever listened to recordings unless she was alone. In therapy, she had made progress. She could now refer to Rick as him or Turner, no longer Dad. She had learned to identify intrusive thoughts and challenge them. She volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, loved spicy ramen, and had recently joined the yearbook club. But some parts of the past refused to stay buried. Ray still struggled with the concept of memory, what was real, what was planted. Some early recollections had returned naturally, like the koala bear or the taste of her mother's lasagna. Others came in fragments, like flashes of light through a thick fog. Sometimes she saw a color and cried without knowing why. One rainy Sunday in early spring, Jessica was sorting laundry upstairs when she heard the ping of her email inbox from the downstairs computer. She ignored it until she heard a second, louder ping. One Ray had custom code to signal a message flagged important. Jessica line read simply, "From Ray, need to talk soon." She clicked. The email was short. "Hey Mom, I was going through the old file boxes to find that music keyboard cable. Found the pink recorder. Not the first one, a different one. I didn't even know there was a second. I hit play. There's a recording. It's his voice. But there's something else. I'm okay. Don't worry. I think you need to hear it." Jessica stared at the screen for several seconds, her breath shallow. The pink recorder. She remembered buying 2 once, one for Hailey to use and one as a backup, in case the buttons broke. She didn't recall what happened to the second one. Maybe it had been packed away during the chaos. Maybe it had been in the same toy chest that held the first recorder, the one that reignited the case all those years ago. But why now? Why hadn't they heard it before? She found Ray in her room, sitting at her desk with the recorder placed gently in the center like a relic. The lights were dim. Her face was calm, but her fingers were fidgeting with a pencil. "I didn't play the whole thing," she said quietly. "Just the first part. I heard him say something weird, something like, 'You'll never remember the real part.'" Jessica sat slowly beside her, unsure if she should ask or wait. Ray handed her the recorder. "I didn't delete it," she said, "but I don't want to hear it again until you do." Jessica pressed play. The voice that emerged was unmistakable. Rick Turner's voice, recorded in a calm, measured tone, speaking directly into the mic as though narrating a bedtime story. "Today is your 7th birthday," he said. "This is the day we decided to start over. I know there will be others who try to tell you different stories. They'll say things I didn't say. They'll lie. But this is the truth. I'm the one who saved you. I'm the only one who keeps." Jessica's hand trembled, but she let the tape roll. The voice continued, describing the day's events, how they celebrated, what they ate, the rules for her new name. Then came something unexpected, another voice. Faint, childlike, Hailey's. Jessica hit stop. The room stayed silent for a long time. Later that night, after Ray had gone to bed, Jessica sat alone with the recorder beside her. She should have handed it over to the FBI, she knew that, but a part of her needed to understand first. She played the final seconds again and again, listening for something deeper than the words themselves. Rick's voice wasn't just manipulative, it was rehearsed, scripted, like he'd made multiple versions, maybe more recordings hidden elsewhere. It felt like the beginning of another thread, another deception, embedded like a virus in an old machine. Ray didn't bring it up again that week, and Jessica didn't push, but both of them knew something had been reopened. A memory, a question, a story not yet finished. The past didn't always end in courtrooms. Sometimes it returned quietly, in the shape of a voice. A whisper recorded for no one and everyone. And in that silence, Jessica knew healing wasn't linear. Sometimes the loop played back on its own. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give it a like. It really helps more people discover these hidden, emotional mysteries. What moment hit you the hardest? Was it the voice recorder, the drawings, or something else entirely? And where are you watching from? Drop your thoughts and location in the comments. We're reading every one.